I'd like to put everything into perspective. It's been 4 years since I last made a video. The only thing that would ever manage to break my hiatus was something so impressively intriguing, something which connected with me so deeply that I couldn't help but write an entire video about it. So, what could have possibly resurrected my channel? Oh, well, these two goddamn goats. I still remember it quite vividly. Earlier this year, I was aimlessly scrolling through backlogs when I stumbled across this peculiar game. The cover art was a striking red, and these two wacky-looking goats were prominently featured. It was called Corn Kidz 64. If I'm being honest, I didn't have any interest in the whole N64 revival trend. Games like Super Kiwi 64 or Cavern of Dreams completely glossed over me. So what was it about Corn Kidz 64 that stood out to me? Once again, these two goddamn goats. I adored their character designs. I already loved goats. They're almost the goat of the animal kingdom, only behind sheep. The goats and sheep have a lot in common. Did you know they're both part of the Cabrini tribe? Anyways, these two goats were special. I could already tell what their personalities were like from how expressive they were and how they dressed. The dude on top's gothic emo look with his red and black color combination, striped arm warmers and rat tail, and the gal on bottom's chaotic blend of bedazzled teeth, hot pink sleeves, striped top, and polka dot stockings were all I needed to know. They both looked like they lived in a Hot Topic. They're genuinely some of the best character designs I've ever seen ever, and that alone was enough for me to buy the game. Admittedly, I wasn't expecting much. I assumed it would simply be a cute N64 tribute and not much more. I didn't even know who this Bogosoft was. But it turns out Bogo's not just some dude nobody's ever heard of before. He's been making independent games independently for decades. Island Cube Sector in particular is an incredibly special indie Metroidvania. It's a seemingly simple game filled with plenty of secrets to find, and its mechanics are pushed to the absolute limits. This all applies to Corn Kidz as well. The more I played it, the more I began to appreciate the sheer amount of nuance and detail. Every time I thought it couldn't impress me more, it went above and beyond. So, if you'll excuse me, I really need to spend another half hour rambling about my gratitude for this goofy goat and goat game. If one were to make a tribute to the N64, it'd be pretty important to replicate the look of the N64 library, right? From my experience, most N64 tributes will recreate the basics. You know, low poly models and environments, low resolution textures, billboarding sprites, even the general art style of those games. Although, what does kind of bother me is how they don't replicate how the games actually looked running on N64. Granted, I've only played a couple of these N64 tributes, so there are probably much better examples I'm unaware of. I don't have anything against 60 FPS, 1080p, widescreen, and all the hardware limitations of the N64 ironed out. I like those as options. But it kind of kills the immersion for me when they don't replicate how a game ran on the N64. It just feels like I'm playing a game with low poly models and textures. Which is why I'm so thankful that Corn Kidz goes above and beyond. Now, if you really want to, you can play the game in 1080p and widescreen, and even at 4K 60 FPS if you adjust some settings in Steam. Personally, I like to play the game in a much more authentically N64 way, in 240p. I will admit that I play without scan lines, but there are so many video options. 3 different scan lines, blur filters, anti-aliasing, the works. The game doesn't simply run at the same resolution though, it also captures a lot of the N64's graphical quirks. Texture filtering, perspective correction, and the way characters fade into the environment all feel very in line with the N64. It even does a great job replicating fog. If anything, I would argue the N64 limitations come at the benefit of the game. The hazy, gloomy atmosphere of all these environments is accentuated further with fog and fade in. It definitely feels much more dreamlike seeing residents of Wallow's Hollow fade into the environment, and the fog makes the town feel much more mysterious and run down. If this truly was an N64 game, it'd probably be one of the best looking on the system. There's so many details scattered throughout the levels that make the world feel far more lived in. I love the striking red sky that coats the entire parking lot. Combined with the dead trees covering the hill behind the building, the hub world feels haunting, yet oddly comforting. Maybe that's because of the forest leading to the parking lot, or the soothing music playing in the background. I love all the little nuances too, such as the red haze inside the forest path, the flickering sign on the Nacho Emporium. There's even a phone tower in the distance covered by all the clouds and trees. Bogo's cartoony, exaggerated art style is replicated perfectly in this game, especially in regards to the ridiculously expressive animations. They utilize plenty of squash and stretch, which is especially noticeable during actions like punching, headbutting, or jumping. There's not a single character in this game that doesn't look lively. It's cathartic seeing these earthbound-ass looking socks swinging back and forth as they trot along. The art style and animation in general reminds me of cartoons like Invader Zim, which I am absolutely all for. The only thing I'd say could have been altered are the sound effects. They're very crisp sounding. I know it's surreal to ask for lower fidelity assets, but I do think the audio clips would capture the N64 feel much more authentically and match the low poly models and textures if they were lower quality. It would be nice as an option at least. That's not to discredit the sound design, it's fantastic. I believe most, if not all of them, are from a stock sound library, which is pretty genuine for N64 titles. A lot of the sound effects are incredibly exaggerated, from the screeches of enemies, to the punchiness of punching, to the heavy thud when falling. Even more subtle sounds are sweet and immersive, like clomping on different surfaces, or the goats bleeding when speaking. When I first started Corn Kidz, I actually turned off the music. Specifically because I've never been the biggest fan of the N64 sound font, and I didn't expect this game's music to sway my feelings. And sure, it was pleasant listening to Korn and Sonic Youth and Nine Inch Nails while clomping through the monster park, but I figured I should give the soundtrack a chance before turning it off entirely. Oh my god, I am so glad I gave it a chance. It's probably one of my favorite video game soundtracks, if I'm being honest. Most of the songs are licensed from different artists, and plenty of them use similar sampling methods as tracks composed on N64. The tracks fantastically capture the atmosphere of the levels, whether it be the upbeat rhythm of the Monster Park theme or the mellow soundscape of the song that plays inside the tree. The soundtrack is incredibly dynamic as well, utilizing remixes of the same song so each area in a world sounds distinct. When you head inside the building in the Monster Park, the synthesizers shift to a lower pitch, and the rhythm section gets a bit quieter too. Don't even get me started on the billions of remixes that play throughout Wallow's Hollow. I'll be playing the soundtrack throughout the video, and you can download it for free on Steam. It's amazing, both as an N64 soundtrack and music in its own right. Now, if you want to get even more authentically N64, the game does officially support the use of an N64 controller. Sort of. You will either need an adapter or the Nintendo Switch Online version, and then you'll have to set up the controls in Steam Input, although there are some presets available. I can't test it myself because I don't even own an N64 controller, let alone an adapter. Although, I'm sure if you combine that with a CRT, it'll almost feel exactly like you're playing Corn Kidz 64 on an N64. So, what exactly is a corn kid? Well, I would assume somebody who lives in the Midwest. So my personal headcanon is that our protagonist, Sev, the developmentally crippled mutant goat, is from Indiana. He's been having a recurring dream about going to the Nacho Emporium for nachos. It seems much more pleasant than the recurring dreams I'd have as a kid of being stuck inside Waluigi Pinball. I'm sure he likes to dip the Tostitos in the guacamole, but the door transports him to Lexi's Monster Park instead. Alexis is quite mystical for a goat. Somehow she turned the inside of a restaurant into an entire playground to test her and Sev's corn powers. What the hell are corn powers anyways? At first I thought it was related to the food. The loading screen is a silhouette of a corn cob. Or maybe it was related to Stephen King's Children of the Corn? Anyways, Seb's corn powers allow him to utilize his singular horn in ways a normal goat wouldn't. Sure, a regular two-horned goat can headbutt just fine, but can they headbutt in the air? Or headbutt upwards? Or headbutt into the ground? Or turn into drills? You know, I think a Seb screwdriver would be the coolest piece of merchandise ever. Otherwise, Seb's moveset is pretty typical for a 3D platformer of this era. He can jump, he can swim, he can punch, although what really shines about his moveset is his wall climbing capabilities. Sure, wall climbing was sometimes in 3D platformers, but it's pushed even further in Corn Kidz. Seb has a much easier time scaling walls, not only being able to hang onto them, but also leap across them. He can even scurry up the wall for a moment before jumping. Combined with drilling and headbutting, Seb's wall climbing is what makes him truly stand out. It's also worth noting that Seb is as methodical as it gets when it comes to 3D platformer movement. None of his moves really help him move quicker. He'll always be trotting along at the same slow pace. With that in mind, he never really felt slow to me. I think part of that has to do with levels always being filled with plenty of set pieces at every step, so I never felt like I was slogging along through these stages. I also, thankfully, never had any issues regarding camera control. It's fully analog, so I was always able to point it in the right direction I wanted. Even if it weren't for that, the camera work is pretty aggressive and almost always pointed where I needed it to. Not to mention, there are 4 entire buttons dedicated to camera movement. The Monster Park makes for a perfect tutorial level in a lot of ways. Even ignoring all the sticky notes Alexis plays throughout the park, the entire level is composed of simple obstacles built around Seb's corn powers. It really does feel like a playground with these slides and weird-ass looking structures. The challenges start out easy and progressively become harder and push Seb's abilities further as he progresses through the park. But hey, if that's not enough, then Alexis's grammatically flawed sticky notes are also helpful. Scattered throughout the park are experience cubes, which are the main collectible of this game. None of the experience cubes are required to progress through the park. In fact, you can't even collect everything on your first visit. Seb is rewarded more cubes for exploring the level and solving challenges though. These aren't the only collectibles available. Seb can find cranks to open up new areas, and this garbage grump requests Seb to knock over 8 trash cans throughout the park. The inside of the giant building introduces Seb to both this octopus-drinking exploding OJ as well as more set pieces centered around his abilities. A lot of these set pieces are really fun to mess with and enhance the typical wall jumping and horn drilling action. The bubbles can be homed into and bounced off with proper timing, leading to riskier platforming scenarios. Seb can also impale these flying bomb birds onto his drill and fire them to explode whatever he so pleases. The most basic puzzles are required to open this door, but experimenting with them nets more experience cubes to collect. There are plenty of other enjoyable set pieces too, like these wall panels or these boost rings. They're all easy to understand and make platforming segments stand out more. But these multi-jump pads are way trickier. Even Alexis says it's too hard. I've gotten used to them, but they require incredibly precise angles and timing. They're never mandatory during any major parts of the game at least. Once Seb reaches the top, he can exit out of the door he came in from, but not before Alexis explains the portal she's floating above. It essentially functions as a checkpoint. If Seb falls to his doom, Alexis will teleport him back to the last
Cornhole 64
he touched. A new portal is located behind the Nacho Emporium, and from here we learn that the only exit from the Dream Realm is locked behind this door with the spooky insignia. And if Seb is able to exit his Dream Realm, he'll reach a realm with infinity nachos. That's literally the plot, but I suppose it's effective. I'm not entirely sure how a sewage pipe behind a parking lot leads to an entire town, But I suppose that's the magic of a dream setting. Wallow's Hollow is where most of the game takes place, as it's the only major level in Corn Kidz. This has the inverse effect of making progression much more railroaded than one would expect for a collectathon. That in mind, I do think the game does a good job supplementing that. Wallow's Hollow is like one giant playground. There are major puzzles to solve, but there are also plenty of little challenges to solve on the side. It doesn't feel like there's any wasted ground. There's almost always something to do at every step Sev takes. Mostly opportunities for more experience cubes, but I also enjoy exploring the town in all its diverse locations. A lot of the pigs are super upset about the cancellation of the Lasagna Festival. An owl named Owlo turned the mayor into a salami, and his legion of owls have been disrupting the lives of all the piggy residents. They can't even go to church without owls taking dumps on their heads. Yeah, the game's sense of humor tends to be on the nose, but I think it fits the tone pretty well. I wasn't laughing my ass off, but there were some jokes that made me giggle every now and again. I don't know, sometimes humor this stupid and silly hits the spot. Word has it that there's quite a bit of wordplay at play too. Wallow's Hollow is filled to the brim with palindromes, from random characters to bits of dialogue to the name of the town itself. There are a healthy dosage of puns thrown in too, which Sev steadily scoffs against. Wait a minute. Who do you think you are with all this wordplay, Stephen Malkmus? That's a compliment, by the way. I love pavement. Anyhow, progressing through Wallow's Hollow is pretty linear. The main goals are to reach the drill tower, collect all 5 disco balls to power the spinny chamber, and then crank the music box so you can enter the tree Owlo is guarding. I never had any trouble figuring out where to go, both because Alexis will give hints about where to go next, and the pause screen tells the player what their current objective is. The drill tower is one of the highest points in Wallow's Hollow, and there are quite a few steps to reaching it. I really like seeing how the puzzle comes full circle. The first step is trying to keep this switch pressed down so Sev can reach the roof of the town center. He'll need something heavy like a boulder to keep it pressed down. And what do you know, there's one in the graveyard. But how do you get to the graveyard? The gate is locked. Well, it looks like there's a way in through the church, but the church doesn't open until 12. I guess we'll have to wind the giant clock forward with the help of this boost pad that spawns after we slammed on this button near the church! The church is home to the first mandatory platforming challenge that's vertically oriented. It's all about using Sev's wall climbing and headbutting to reach the exit at the top. The shitting owls function similarly to bubbles, so make sure to time jumps properly. The stakes are quite literally much higher, as making a mistake will cause Sev to plummet all the way back to the bottom. Along the way though, he'll find the first of 2 power-ups in this game, the Fall Warp. This allows Sev to teleport to the last cornhole he reached while in his freefall state. It makes checkpoints far more useful, as not only can Sev warp back without losing nearly as much progress, but he also loses way less health. There's a bit of nuance to how the portals work too. In situations where you need to collect something far away, you can always take advantage of the fall warp to reduce backtracking. Although, it is worth noting that platforming challenges reset when you warp. During this part on the roof of the town center, you'll need to move these spinning platforms so you can headbutt into these owls. But if you fall down and warp, the entire puzzle resets. I didn't mind it personally, but I can imagine it being much more aggravating for players continually messing up. Eventually, Sev does reach the drill tower. I have to say, reaching the highest point in town and taking in the view of everything below is oddly cathartic. But that's not why we're here. Inside the drill tower, Sev gains access to the other power-up, the drill. It allows him to burrow inside dirt surfaces. Some experience cubes are found underground, which are indicated by the glowing red spots. There are plenty of these scattered throughout Wallow's Hollow, so it's a good opportunity to explore the town more and see what Sev can access with his drill. Although, it would probably be better to speak to Saint Nert first. The spinning chamber no longer works because the 5 disco balls are missing, and I suppose Sev is forced into finding them. This is definitely the most open-ended part of the game. Sev is allowed to collect the 5 disco balls however he so pleases. There's plenty of variety with obtaining each disco ball. They're all found in brand new areas for Sev to explore, so hunting for them offers new challenges to overcome. I really enjoy clobbering all the rats in the sanitary zoo, especially with that gnarly guitar in the background. The drill power has plenty of usage here, both when it concerns reaching the zoo and while trying to kill all the rats. Scaling the side of this cliff also takes good advantage of the drill, along with... oh, those poor dragons. Oh, that poor Sev! Lining up the music box is a great example of how Corn Kidz' multi-layered puzzle design shines. Although, the easiest disco ball to obtain is literally within the shop. This blue-flavored mousy will help Sev scale to the top and reach the disco ball. While up here, you may also notice a door in the distance. The challenge behind it is probably the most interesting of all the disco balls, if you ask me. This section is oddly combat-focused, and for a game where combat amounts to punching an enemy 3 times, that doesn't seem enticing. Yet, in this instance, it clicks. Sev is faced against 3 of these zombie turtles. On top of the others trying to attack while Sev is focused on just one, squelching these weasels is a multi-step process that requires headbutting, punching, and ground pounding. It's incredible seeing combat pushed in ways that tie into the design of the game and not simply used as a means to an end or to collect health. However, this is all assuming the player is already level 3. Reaching new areas isn't always as simple as challenging platforming. What's funny about experience in this game is that when Sev levels up, he quite literally gains access to more levels. Most level doors are optional and grant access to extra collectibles, but a few of them are required to progress. Namely, the door at the top of St. Enerd's trinkets. So collecting experience cubes is necessary for progression and may halt the player's flow. Now, I never had to grind for experience cubes to progress. In fact, I was usually a higher level than what the game required at points. But I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who did run into these roadblocks. It doesn't help that there's no status screen nor indicator to aid in finding cubes. I will admit that I ran into situations where I would quite literally bang my head against a wall trying to find any missing experience cubes. Sometimes the cubes can really blend into the environment. In the Monster Park, they stand out against the blue hues, but the brownness of Wallow's Hollow makes them difficult to spot. In particular, I tend to miss the cubes in the church window since they're both a gleaming red. Although, maybe observing the surroundings diligently is the whole point. I remember one time I was messing around in the graveyard, headbutting into these squealing tombstones. Then all of a sudden I was awarded an experience cube. I seriously didn't realize it would do anything. Then I found out there were more layers to this puzzle, and it all led to what I previously assumed was throwaway dialogue from Alexis. The best part is that all these different pieces were hinted at before. I doubt I would have received the same level of satisfaction had there been more leverage or I relied on a guide. Don't get me wrong, I like Spark's Gem Finder in the Spyro games. I like having a status screen, but I'm honestly glad the players left on their own to find as much as they can in Corn Kidz. It's important to be as observant as possible, both in terms of searching the world and listening to hints from Alexis or the pigs. Literally every little detail matters, even the ones that seem superfluous. At the very least, none of the major collectibles are cryptic, and the player only needs to reach level 4 to access everything necessary. Surely there are easy ways to reach higher levels though, right? Absolutely! Sev can come across these mirror challenges. They're tough obstacle courses that push specific abilities of Sev's, like reaching the top of a tower with his drill power. Some of them are really creative with their goals, like catching 16 cans of Dream Soda by pushing this bucket back and forth. I also appreciate how discovering them is always drastically different, such as headbutting into owls to reach the top of a tree stump, or uncovering an alcove in this cliffside. The mirrors net 10 experience points each for completing them, so there's some of the most valuable methods for leveling up. Most of the side quests and optional platforming challenges will reward Sev with a large crystal, which also net him 10 experience points. You can also find chameleon moths disguising themselves as objects, as well as red screws in walls. They're worth 5 points and 3 points respectively. All of these make leveling up much easier than simply collecting experience cubes along the way. The last thing worth noting is that there are plenty of collectibles Sev can only obtain in the monster park once he gains the drill. There's also a level 3 door which hides both a mirror challenge where Sev bounces to the top of these springs, as well as the last trash can you need to satisfy the garbage grump. Normally I prefer when you can obtain everything in a level without needing to backtrack, but I don't mind for this one instance. If anything, I think it's really cool the tutorial level offers way more than meets the eye. Okay, I'm not gonna sit here praising everything about Corn Kidz. It's certainly not without its issues. One of the most common criticisms against Corn Kidz. Oh, that poor Sev. Fall damage was a common mechanic in early 3D platformers. You mess up a jump, you take damage as punishment. It kind of made sense, but could be annoying. When I say this is a common criticism against Corn Kidz, I mean it's literally what ruins the game for some people. And to be fair, I can see why. Falling is incredibly punishing in this game. Sev doesn't really have any moves he can use to negate fall damage. In fact, he can't do anything at all. After falling from a certain distance, he enters a freefall state where the only control he'll take is moving around in hopes of landing on a soft surface. And keep in mind that Corn Kidz is all about climbing. It's a vertically oriented game, so taking fall damage is both pretty common and incredibly punishing. But what if I argue that not only does Corn Kidz handle fall damage better than its inspirations, but it's actually integral to the game's design? It sounds unbelievably absurd, but I am not kidding when I say that. The truth is, fall damage wasn't even something I ever thought about while playing Corn Kidz. So what the hell does it accomplish regarding fall damage? Well, first of all, checkpoint to no lives. Those alone make a difference. More importantly, a key element of Corn Kidz is observing the surroundings. There are actually plenty of surfaces that are soft enough to land safely. The grass, leaves, and mud throughout Wallow's Hollow are almost always placed around the higher areas of the map, and when they aren't, there are plenty of mattresses. I can't even say they look out of place. Random mattresses scattered throughout around downtown like Wallow's Hollow is the icing on top. Panning the camera to a bird's eye view also helps in finding a safe place to land. Not to mention, it actually takes quite a distance for Sev to take damage. If the game was barely functional or poorly made, then I would complain, but I don't think that's the case. The levels are perfectly designed around Sev's climbing capabilities. The tougher, vertically oriented platforming challenges tend to be separate from the open-ended explorative parts of the level design. It even has mechanics like fall warp to compensate for falling. Were there moments where fall damage was ridiculous or times where falling did feel like a screw-up on the game's part? Of course, but those were moments. Is the punishment for falling a bit over the top? Well, yeah, but it's important to know this seems to be Bogosoft's design mentality. Lyle in Cube Sector is also incredibly punishing for losing, sending Lyle all the way back to his home after a game over. The only saving grace are the 3 warp pads close to the start. Although, it never felt like it was the game's fault when I did die. It always felt like my fault. It's certainly not a design mentality for everyone, but I'd argue Lyle and Corn Kidz are so well designed that being punished repeatedly only motivated me to push myself further until I succeeded. It felt way more gratifying than if they pulled their punches. Anyways, once Sev does collect all 5 disco balls, he can finally activate the spinny chamber and flip the world around. With the world mirrored, there are plenty of new secrets to find. A lot of them require similar solutions to previous puzzles, but now there's the twist of everything being reversed. If you're missing some experience cubes, chances are they're in the reverse world. Although, more importantly, the music box should play properly, which triggers Aloe's deathly fear of royalty-free music. The last major challenge to face in Wallow's Hollow is inside of the tree. This is one of my favorite parts of the game. In fact, when I first played Corn Kidz 64, this was when I really started to love it. I adore the foggy atmosphere, and the song that plays is beyond blissful. Of course, the inside of the tree also makes for a great level. I think Corn Kidz strives furthest when it doubles down on linear platforming challenges, and this is definitely the most vertical level up to this point. I really enjoy the variety present with each challenge the level presents. From climbing these stumps to headbutt these owls so you can make it across the gap, to the final stretch with all the vines to climb and bugs to dodge. There is quite a bit to explore in here too. Make sure to split the bird feces for a special surprise. The entire bottom of the tree is filled with water, so taking fall damage won't be an issue. Although, there is a huge stretch between the 2 checkpoints, and with all these challenges situated in the sky, there's a good chance one will mess up and restart all the way from the bottom. Considering the game is usually generous with checkpoint placement, this can feel stricter than necessary. Once Sev reaches the top, he can face Aloe once and for all, assuming he's at least level 4. I've praised and defended Corn Kidz a lot in this video, but this is one part I won't defend. In fact, let's dig into why my least favorite part of Corn Kidz 64 is the Aloe fight. The first time I fought Aloe, I despised it! I couldn't figure out how to land a hit, and he'd often attack me while I was figuring out a solution. How was I supposed to aim the bombies at him? Am I supposed to suicide bomb my way through? It was so confusing, and considering how long each cycle was, I was getting pretty fed up. And then an update rolled around which added a button prompt to let the player know Sev can aim bombies with the R trigger. Believe you me, I felt like an idiot when I realized the battle was easier than I made it. With this newfound knowledge in mind, yeah, this battle is about as intense as driving through a yellow light. It's a 3-cycle fight where you wait around dodging Aloe's attacks until a platform falls down, giving you access to a bombie. You then aim the bombie at Aloe while he tries spitting up rocks at you. Repeat 2 more times, but with the difficulty slightly increasing. I'll give the fight credit, mechanics like wall climbing and bombies are taken good advantage of, but otherwise, the duel is just kind of boring. There are ways to make 3-cycle wait and attack boss patterns interesting, but Aloe's attacks are predictable and slow, and most of the battle amounts to waiting. If the fight was only about climbing the wall and aiming the bombie while simultaneously dodging Aloe's attacks, maybe I'd be more receptive. Aloe could have also possibly been a bit more aggressive, but I would rather not dawdle too much about what I wish the fight was. The Aloe battle is pretty average for 3D platformer bosses, which in general tend to be below average. Was it really worth the hassle anyways? Mayor Wallow scorned Sev for saving his bacon. All because of what? Donor support? Okay, maybe killing Aloe wasn't the best decision, but either way... That fucking pig deserves to die! Well, it's not all bad. Defeating Aloe opens the gate, and now Sev can finally get his nachos. Surely it'll be a frolic in the... Oh. Sev can't catch a break, can he? For being the final challenge in the story, the tower does not hold back. It triples down on the vertically oriented linear platforming challenges, and it's honestly one of the best parts of the game. Checkpoints are found at every major section, and it's way less likely to fall down to the very beginning. Even if you do, fall warp is your friend. And getting a game over just means warping back to the last checkpoint, so All the challenges present can be tackled as many times as the player needs. The outside sections of the tower focus more on the raw platforming and wall climbing. There are some puzzling elements here and there, but overall, it's way more focused on the action. Making mistakes often amounts to a fate with doom, so you'll have to be extra cautious while committing to actions. As long as you pay attention to the cycles though, you should be fine. The indoor segments are a bit more puzzle-like and focus on a brand new mechanic with the spring bees. They bounce off surfaces, and if Sev impales one and headbutts into a surface, they'll send him flying. They're especially helpful for making it across large gaps or reaching higher elevations. Sev can also fire them like bombies, and they ricochet off walls. This is used for some creative puzzles higher in the tower. Despite only featuring in the final stretch of the game, the spring bees are tutorialized super well, and their utilization keeps up with the increasing difficulty of the tower. Nearly every single set piece up to this point is pushed to their limits. Every time I thought the challenges presented couldn't impress me more, they somehow skyrocketed further. It even does a great job blending the methodical puzzles with the precise platforming. My favorite moment was probably this one where you need to grab this bombie in the air. It involves some tight wall scaling, drilling, and tight roping to reach and drop this box. And then the turtle man inside can be bounced off to reach the bombie. You can blow up this wall to reveal a spring bee, and after some more careful wall climbing to reach it, you can bounce across the gap. The only section that feels jarring is the chase sequence. Sev gets tailed by a giant sock and needs to run away as quickly as he can, or else the sock will kick him to his doom. It can be difficult because it's a side-scrolling section with 3D movement, and some parts of the level design actively slow down Sev. Thankfully, this section is placed right next to a checkpoint, so there's no punishment for trying over and over. It does make for an incredibly memorable moment, and it's the last major set piece of the tower. After this is some more puzzle solving and one final wall jump panel to reach the top. Despite all the effort and trauma Sev faced, that still wasn't enough for Nachos. Instead, Alexis blathers about how if he keeps having the same Nacho dreams, he'll lose his corn powers and she would never find him again. I can see past your swindling smile, you sicko. Instead, she sends Sev flying into the vortex to exit his dreams. But guess who does get nachos? You're not even supposed to eat nachos if you're wearing braces! Is Alexis most likely responsible for everything Sev went through? Probably, but we don't have time to focus on that. If you manage to reach at least level 5, then you'll discover that the tower has a doppelganger. The Anxiety Tower. If the tower pushed the mechanics of Corn Kidz 64 to its limits, then the Anxiety Tower pushes the limits of 3D platforming to heights unseen. By me, at least. This is the toughest challenge in the entire game. There are checkpoints, but gaming over sends Sev back to the very bottom. Dream Soda is scarce, and there's no help from Alexis along the way. It is actually a bit shorter than the tower, but chances are it'll take way longer to finish. Before even considering conquering the Anxiety Tower, I would recommend getting the health upgrade. I didn't mention this before, but there's a side quest in Wallow's Hollow dedicated to discovering bottle caps. They're often found around the same areas you'd need to explore anyways, but with some extra steps involved. Collecting all 5 rewards Sev with an extra health point, which is a godsend for a challenge like this. You can also replay the mirror challenges here for practice. As far as the actual design of the Anxiety Tower, it's less focused on multi-layered puzzles and way more on balls to the walls trial and error platforming. There's only really one way to overcome a lot of these obstacles, although I think the mentality works really well for a linear challenge like this. All the different set pieces are utilized in some capacity and experimented with even further than they were in the tower. I think most of the obstacles presented are a lot of fun to surpass. It's difficult to articulate what I like about most of them, but this part with the rotating platform stands out to me the most with how much it pushes wall clinging. It feels like every single section focuses on a different mechanic, and the difficulty slowly but surely ramps up as Seth climbs higher. Although, there are a few iffy moments. Sometimes I have trouble reaching the top of this dirt block. It feels ridiculously precise. I also find it strange how this is the first time the wall jump pads are utilized outside of the monster park. Chances are most players won't understand how they work, but to be fair, Alexis does recommend practicing with them first. What infuriated me the most were these bubbles near the end. This has less to do with the challenge itself and more to do with depth perception. The N64 visuals make it a lot more difficult to perceive how far away something can be. There were plenty of instances where it looked like I should have been able to home in on a bubble, but I ended up falling to my doom. It really puts into perspective why 3D platformers tend to not push themselves this much. While I still commend Corn Kidz for its reliable mechanics and doubling down on tough platforming challenges, it also makes inherent problems of pushing a 3D platformer this much stick out. Poor depth perception is pretty much inevitable for N64 platformers no matter how you slice it. When the limitations are thrust further than they ever have before, they also smell a lot more. All of these problems caused me to absolutely dread the Anxiety Tower my first run through. I would slowly inch closer and closer, but one section always caused me to kick the bucket. It took me an entire day to finish, and once I did reach the top, I didn't want to touch Corn Kidz again for a good while. I definitely didn't expect to complete the Anxiety Tower 7 more times. Yeah, I honestly don't care how bullshit it can be. Completing the Anxiety Tower is genuinely one of the proudest accomplishments I've made in a video game. Does it push the limits of 3D platforming to uncomfortable degrees? Yes, but that's why I like it. I love seeing games push themselves this much, and Corn Kidz 64 pushes itself not only further than I ever expected, but further than probably any game I've ever played. I wish more games finished with the balls to the walls hard challenge. Are you rewarded anything for completing the Anxiety Tower? Well, sort of. I actually lied about there being no status screen. You're gifted one for reaching the top and heading through the door. I really wish you didn't have to conquer the most difficult part of the entire game just to see how many collectibles are left, but it does put a smile on my face seeing these goofy goats grinning with glee over my pain and suffering. I'm just glad I can finally wrap things up and share my closing thoughts on— Wait, what the hell is this blue screw? There are two abnormal screws one should come across scaling Anxiety Tower. They're colored blue and are tallied up in the pause screen. There's only one hint pointing towards their purpose. These two question marks at the top of Anxiety Tower. Well, one of them is missing a period, but that can't mean anything, right? Every little detail matters, even the seemingly superfluous ones. As if the game wasn't already impressing the hell out of me, it came as a complete shocker that not even the Anxiety Tower was where the limits had peaked. No, they were spunked further in some other place. That's literally what it's called. If you fire a bombing at the bottom of this incomplete question mark in Wallow's Hollow, a hole will appear that takes Sev there. The purpose of these baffling blue screws is to unlock barriers blocking progression. When I say these void screws push the limits of Corn Kidz, I mean in the sense that obtaining most of them literally feels like breaking the boundaries of the game. In the Monster Park, there are 3 of them defined, and one of them requires escaping past the gates surrounding the park and outrunning this death bubble. From there, you'll make some tricky wall jumps across these bubbles, and you'll be rewarded with a void screw. There are a whopping 5 void screws found throughout Wallow's Hollow, and a lot of these require paying attention to ridiculously minute details one may gloss over. You know that one bat floating in the distance of the drill tower? It takes you to a void screw above the clouds. You see those rails hanging from the ceiling of the church? If you can get across them, there's a screw on the other side. My favorite was the one that gave me an excuse to explode those stupid fish. It's always the best feeling when you reach areas in games you feel like you shouldn't be in, and Corn Kidz literally encourages that. There's one extra void screw hidden inside some other place. Apparently it is possible to reach the end without it, but I always like opening every barrier. Anyways, what's so special about this secret hideout? Is it just a surreal art gallery? Well, yes, but it's also home to a few prizes. Sebs can put on different headbands that change the colors of his outfit and the logo on his shirt. You can also collect another health upgrade, which you can actually obtain before challenging the Anxiety Tower. Oh, and there's also a Pseudo Regalia cameo. What's poppin', Sybil? What really stands out to me about some other place are the 2 rooms near the end. While exploring this mysterious maze, Sev will have to partake in some tricky platforming to progress. Along the way, he'll find these 2 light cubes to activate. There are 2 more to find in these rooms off to the side before he can finish the finish line. I'll talk about the right first. Entering this room requires being level 6, so you'll need to collect everything. This room is the test zone. I always thought it was so cool how you could enter the test rooms in Sonic Adventure 2 with glitches, but never ever did I think a game would include the test room as an actual playable level. There's a lot you can mess with here, but the primary goal is to grab all these floating white cubes. It's straightforward enough. Every set piece and mechanic is utilized in simple ways. Grabbing them all rewards Sev with another light cube to activate. The room I really want to ramble about is the one to the left. Before even entering, Sev finds this strange pixel art of a goat stealing his clothes. The room itself is this uncanny field with a weird-ass purple bird hipster. Oh, I guess Sev's a hipster too. The name of the room is 2010. What does any of this have to do with? I honestly think this is the coolest thing ever. Final Freakend is actually pretty fun for a prototype too. You play as this demon goat named Dally, who has much different abilities than Sev. It is fully possible to finish, and there's even a second level after collecting everything. It's at least worth checking out on itch.io to see where Corn Kidz started. For the record, I understand why most games aren't this open about all the layers that comprise the end result. I know I feel insecure whenever I show my unfinished work, and I wouldn't expect any developer to share all the parts of the game nobody was meant to see. I find it interesting in this case because at least nowadays Bogosoft is way more quiet. Every once in a blue moon you may find an update on the BogoZone site. So it impresses me that he was willing to push the boundaries of his own game this far. Oh my god, a new free cow? Anyways, are you rewarded anything for reaching the end of some other place? A few things. You discover the dog god was real after all, and he rewards you with a grilled cheese for accomplishing everything. Whatever, close enough. I think it's safe to say I dig the goat game. Normally now would be the point where I summarize my thoughts, but this time I want to focus way more on my deeper feelings and what the game means to me on a personal level. Near the start of this year, I was honestly in a bit of an art rut. My style had stagnated and I was disappointed by how drab my drawings felt. But when I stumbled across those 2 goofy goats, my whole perspective flipped. Among other things, I was missing boldness and expression. I reworked the way I draw, focusing way more on being loose than whatever the hell I was trying before. I won't act like my art is as lively or exaggerated as Corn Kidz, but I like to think I've come a long way since last year. Once I finally did play Corn Kidz 64, I never wanted to put it down. I never mentioned how short the game is, but that's actually something I love about it. One of my favorite games is Portal because of how short and replayable it is, and Corn Kidz basically became that for 3D platformers. This silly goat game didn't just become an obsession, it turned into a hyperfixation, and I do not use that term loosely. I actually met quite a few friends within the community. As somebody who has trouble making friends, it resonated with me knowing a game helped me connect with others. And believe me, I could easily view Corn Kidz 64 through a critical lens. The inherent inherent limitations of 3D platformers reek with poor depth perception, which is especially damning when the game pushes its limits so far. There's a lot less freedom when it comes to both progressing through the game and solving its challenges. The solutions are much more rigid, and the punishment for messing up can be really off-putting, especially for less skilled players. If I had to give this game an objective score, it would probably land around who the hell cares? Why does it matter how objectively good the game is? What matters is how much someone enjoys it, even in spite of issues they may acknowledge or agree with. I'll admit that Corn Kidz 64 is flawed, but I'm not ashamed to admit it's one of my favorite games I've ever played, as well as almost the goat of goat-based games. Sorry, but Pseudo is right there. Anyways, I tried my best to finish this video as soon as possible. I really wanted it to line up with the 1-year anniversary of the game, and I couldn't have done it without the help of some very important individuals. Still, for providing both plenty of feedback for the script and borders during gameplay, as well as just being really fun to talk to. Ethanator611 for recording footage of Corn Kidz on a CRT and also reading over the script for me. My girlfriend Sage for listening to all my rambling about Corn Kidz and also being the coolest girlfriend ever. And not that the creator directly helped or is even listening, but I also want to thank Bogosoft for not only creating one of the most mind-melting games I've experienced, but a game that touched me on personal levels. Believe it or not, but your Goofy Goat game revitalized my YouTube channel, and I can't thank you enough.